Yoda's exile on Dagobah is perhaps the most pivotal moment in his entire 900-year lifespan. For generations, he had taught the Jedi in the ways of the light, guided the Jedi Order, and learned much about the wisdom of the Force. But the Force had yet much more to teach him, and it had to happen in complete solitude. Although the Empire searched endlessly for Yoda, they were never able to find him simply because he had hidden himself too well. Dagobah had been deleted from almost every star chart in the galaxy, and the dark side cave was so potent that it masked Yoda's shining presence in the sight of the Emperor and all other prying eyes. But just because he lived in perpetual isolation does not mean that he didn't have a few visitors. Every now and then someone landed on the planet either by accident or in search of something greater, and each time they would have an experience with the old Jedi Master that they would never forget. So join us today as we open up yet another holocron and document every person that we could find that managed to find Yoda on Dagobah. But first, upon our visit in the dark side cave, we received a disturbing vision. Many who watch the channel have not yet subscribed, so if you haven't yet, and you feel the pull, reach out and crush that subscribe button. It is your destiny. Now my friends, let's begin. Yoda may have believed that he would no longer fight when he went into exile. Once he went to Dagobah, he would assume the role of a hermit, and no longer a guardian of peace or justice. But fate, of course, had other plans for him, and he would need to defend the peace once more. This happened when his earliest visitor turned out to be a dark Jedi of all things, and a smuggler by the name of George Kardas. George was a smuggler from the world of Corellia who had lived a criminal life through childhood and during the Clone Wars. He was familiar with the Jedi Order's exploits and may have even seen Yoda in action long ago. And by chance, he would encounter the Grand Master once more following the Purge. By this point, he was a part of a crew of smugglers that had gotten themselves entangled in a Dark Jedi skirmish over the world of Bafash. Their ship was taken over by the Dark Jedi who had decided to torture and kill all of the crewmates over a period of several days. This left Kardas genuinely terrified, who would end up fleeing from system to system with enemy ships hot on his trail. He thought of plan after plan on how he would save himself, until he was eventually downed on the world of Dagobah by the Dark Jedi ship. After landing, the Dark Jedi came after the smuggler, expecting them to be alone on this remote world. But he was proven wrong when he found the former Grand Master of the Jedi. From the shadows, George watched as the two Force wielders entered a fierce battle. Yoda's advanced age kept him from being able to end the battle swiftly against the Dark Jedi, who actually proved to be quite powerful despite not being a fully formed Sith Lord. Their duel took them all over the swamp, and lasted for over a day before Yoda eventually managed to put the Darksider down once and for all. The whole time though, George watched in terror, never having experienced the Force in such a mighty capacity. But during the fight, he had gotten mortally wounded and had required medical attention. Yoda would nurse him back to health over the course of several days, pouring the Force itself into his wounds in order to heal him completely. During that time, Yoda talked with him and told him how to turn his life around and how to live an honest life among the galaxy. However, Kardas was changed by this encounter, and once he got back to his ship and departed the world, he perceived that a tiny amount of Yoda's power had been transferred to him during the healing process. Not enough to allow him to physically use the Force, but enough that he was able to outthink his opponents in the future. The smuggler was now able to figure out his competitor's strategies and plans, allowing him to stop them before they could execute them. He even eventually realized that there was no limit to what he could do, and began absorbing his competitors one by one. The smuggler's organization boomed, and he became an extremely wealthy man. But not all was well. Unfortunately, his personality had also been changed by his encounter with Yoda, and he became ruthless, merciless, dangerous. Much later in the year 0 BBY, he would land himself in hot water as his health began to drastically decline. In a panic, he raced to Dagobah in order to find Yoda again. But upon landing, he threatened the old Jedi Master with the blaster, violently demanding that Yoda heal him again. Yoda instead though, simply used the Force to take his blaster and the beacon call from his ship, and to fling them deep into the swamp. He then berated Kardas for wasting the second chance that he had been given at life. He also told the crime lord that he could not help him any further, since he was preparing for the most important training that he would ever give. Training to a young Luke Skywalker, whom he perceived would be arriving soon. But Yoda was not without compassion, and he directed the smuggler to find the Ang-Ti monks, another light side-based religion that could perhaps give him the help that he needed. However, the smuggler, ashamed and humiliated at his own actions, refused to return to his criminal empire, and instead sought out the monks as directed by Yoda. He would learn great wisdom and insights about the Force from this group, and would eventually change his life for the better, showing that even in his exile, Yoda was an excellent teacher. The next set of people who would find Yoda that we're going to mention as a collective, since it all happens within the same story. This group, known as the Children, Tash, Zakaranda, and Professor Mammon Hoole. This story is quite long, so we'll keep it brief for the sake of this holocron. The Children are a group of cannibalistic humans who were the descendants of a Republic explorer ship that crash-landed on Dagobah. They taught their children how to survive the world by eating the flesh of the weakest members, or of other beings that they could locate. But in an unknown event, they eventually would find and locate Yoda. For one reason or another, they were terrified of him, and referred to him as the Imp. Tash and Zakaranda were children who had survived the destruction of Alderaan, and were traveling the galaxy by a man by the name of Mammon Hoole, uncovering mysteries and exploring the secrets of the Jedi religion. In this particular story, they were being hunted by the Empire, who had hired Boba Fett. As the story unfolds, the 3 survivors and Boba Fett escape from the grasp of the Children, and Yoda would later incapacitate them by leading them to the darkside cave near his hut. With all the commotion going on around his hut, Yoda emerged and would meet Mammon Hoole with the 2 children. They would then give them some wisdom and reveal that Tash and Zak were actually Force sensitives. Yoda would then send them on their way, but he knew that their journey as Jedi had now just begun. Years later, they would train in Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxium, where they were much older, and while we haven't confirmed it yet, it is very possible that Boba Fett may have actually caught a glimpse of Yoda during all of these events. But we don't count him on this list since he didn't directly interact with the Jedi at all. Moving on, we now have someone that was looking for Yoda and found him, when the young Jedi Knight Qu Rahn came to Dagobah. Qu Rahn had actually trained under Yoda as a Jedi youngling, and was well antiquated with the Jedi Grand Master. Somehow the Jedi had actually survived Order 66, and figured out that Yoda managed to survive his encounter with the Emperor, and had gone into exile on Dagobah. Wanting to keep his old master safe, the Jedi guarded the information and kept it to himself. And during the days of Order 66, Rahn had joined a group of Jedi who had all dedicated themselves to finding and killing Darth Vader. But what Rahn did not know was that some of them had been corrupted by the dark side, and planned on turning their friends over to the Dark Lord. The fallen Jedi betrayed their brothers, and gave them up to the Empire. Rahn, however, somehow managed to evade Darth Vader. Troubled and confused about those Jedi and how they embraced the dark side so readily, Rahn made the dangerous journey to Dagobah in order to find the Grand Master. He hoped that the Master's wisdom would give him clarity, and to finally find resolution within his thoughts that were troubling him so deeply. When he found him though, instead of a reassuring conversation, Yoda would shock him, speaking very enigmatically about a planet on which was located a Valley of Jedi Souls, a place of great power. This was the Valley of Ruusan, where Lord Khan had detonated the thought bomb of Darth Bane. What was left behind was an iridescent orb of power that contained the souls of all of the Jedi and Sith that had been caught in the explosion. They had been trapped there now for over 1,000 years in agony, but that place was now an incredibly potent nexus that the Inquisitor Jarek greatly desired in his own bid to overthrow the Emperor and become more powerful. Using his powers as one of the last living members of the Jedi Council, Yoda decided to do one last promotion and bestowed upon Rahn the rank of a Jedi Master. He then gave him a golden lightsaber and taught him how to retain his identity after death and become a Force ghost. This knowledge and gift by Yoda baffled Qu Rahn, but he accepted the lightsaber and vowed to protect the weapon as his own. He then went on to find his way to the Valley of the Jedi Souls and would protect it from Jarek. But this would not be the last time that Yoda encountered a Force sensitive besides Luke, because the next person to find him was actually the clone of Galen Marek. Starkiller did not go to Dagobah to find Yoda specifically, however. He was simply following the strange visions that he was receiving in the Force, and hints given to him by Master Ram Koda. Landing on the planet, he probed the swamps through the Force, discovering an odd Force signature, and he felt it studying him in return. Picking his way through the swamp towards it, Starkiller reached the Darkside Cave and was greeted by Yoda. He could sense the cave as a place of great power and wondered if Yoda was its guardian, but the Jedi humbly responded that he was more of a watcher than anything else, a simple observer. After a moment, Galen entered the cave and experienced horrifying visions that steered him in a new direction in his journey, and upon exiting, he was greatly disturbed. He had not felt a concentration of Darkseid that potently since being in the presence of none other than Darth Sidious. Yoda encouraged him to follow where his visions were taking him, and Galen listened, but only because he wanted to depart this place as soon as possible. Having felt the potent energy of the Darkside Cave, he could not wrap his head around how Yoda could sit there right next to it completely unaffected. This left only two options in his mind. Either Yoda was so black-hearted and evil that he had gone literally insane from the dark side, or he was so powerful in the light that it dwarfed the strength of Sidious, rendering him unaffected by the darkness. Both of these options terrified Starkiller and made him want to leave Yoda's presence as quickly as possible. And finally, one of the last people who visited the Grand Master prior to Luke was the Rebel Alliance historian Arul Hextrophon. While conducting research at the University of Charmath, Hextrophon discovered information suggesting a possible location of a Jedi. Fascinated by the possibility, the historian traveled to Dagobah and searched the planet's swamps. He eventually found Yoda, but the Jedi quickly entered the routine of pretending to be a simple-minded and a senile old hermit. Hextrophon remained unconvinced and decided to keep pressing the creature. This would take a matter of days as the Jedi Master and the historian entered a battle of wills with one another. Ultimately, it would be Yoda who relented and revealed his nature once he saw that he wasn't going to budge at all. Yoda indicated his surprise that he had found him, as he believed all records that could lead to him had all been destroyed. Concerned that knowledge of his existence and location could be problems, Yoda planned to wipe his brain and all knowledge of his presence. However, the historian protested in terror at losing his memories, and Yoda again reconsidered. He came to feel that it was not the Jedi way to cause pain in others, and although an argument could be made that the historian would know pain since he didn't know what had happened, Yoda understood the knowledge meant a great deal to the man, and so the Jedi spent the next several days conversing with the historian, relieved to once again being able to speak freely about being isolated for so long. When Hextrophon left Dagobah, he returned to his world and wiped the very records that had allowed him to locate Yoda. Having said that, he ultimately decided against erasing his own personal notes of his time on Dagobah, but he kept his vow never to discuss his encounter with anyone else. And so this is just about everyone who found Yoda during his exile, at least in Legends. From what we could find, the only person other than Luke who found Yoda in canon was a woman by the name of Madeline's son. She was working for Qi'ra, the leader of Crimson Dawn. In the story, Qi'ra is on a warpath in order to find a way to topple the reign of the Sith over the galaxy, and desired to enlist the help of Yoda, believing that he was the only one that could match the power of the Sith. Madeline would use her vast archival knowledge to track down Yoda to Dagobah, and attempted to convince him to join them. But of course, Yoda was a changed being. He understood that none of his powers could defeat the Sith in the traditional way. That time had now passed. During her stay on Dagobah though, Madeline was attacked by a monster after arriving on the world, and Yoda had used the Force to save her from a distance, and then led her into the dark side cave in order to dissuade her from looking for him. Having a change of heart though, she left the planet and would return to Qi'ra, lying to her and telling her that Yoda was dead. While the two didn't exactly interact on a personal level, this still technically counts since she saw and knew that Yoda was there. An extremely impressive moment. But this technically concludes the list of all of those who found Yoda on Dagobah in both Legends and canon. In the vast amounts of stories that now exist, it could be possible that we missed one, so if you happen to know of someone who interacted with Yoda that we did not mention here, be sure to comment it down below. As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining us in the archives, and may the Force be with you.